Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. If you enjoying this fanfic then press the like button and subscribe my channel.
Let's start a fanfic. Which is what if Naruto fell in love with Ino and build harem with Ino Kurotsuchi and Haku, Part 3. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. Kuchio's no jutsu. Naruto slammed his hand down. Suddenly there was a series of pops and small clouds of smoke rising. From the smoke, a pack of foxes dressed in samurai armor and armed with katanas appeared. They all looked to Naruto and without a word, they charged for the sound shinobi. Naruto and the rest of Team 7 took off for the tower in an attempt to lose the sound ninja. Naruto jumped ahead, but didn't realize where he was going. Naruto! Sakura screamed. Snake! Naruto slowed down too late and was swallowed by the snake. Sasuke and Sakura stopped abruptly and started burning through hand seals. Sakura looked behind and sighed in relief when she couldn't see the Oto Genin or the foxes anymore. She and Sasuke took deep breaths and channeled their chakra. Sakura leaned on her right leg and held her right hand out. Sasuke leaned on his left leg and held his left hand out. After a few minutes, lightning formed and sparked to life. Rasengan. The muffled shout caused Sakura and Sasuke to hold back their attack. The snake's belly started expanding, but them exploded, showering the area with snake bits and snake entrails. Naruto was in the epicenter, covered in the digestive juices of the large summon. That was the first time in his entire life since the Hunt the Demon days that the redhead had feared for his own life. Naruto, do you know who that man was? Kushina asked out loud. Nah, Ka-chan. Naruto replied. That was Orochimaru of the Sannin. She answered his unasked question. He is as much of snake as his summons are. Be careful Naruto-kun. Naruto looked over at his two teammates to see them with disappointed looks on their faces. Naruto didn't understand why. The two have used the Chidori on so many missing ninja on their previous missions, but then again, they have never killed a summon before. But they were never swallowed by on, were they? Naruto shrugged that argument away and walked up to his teammates. Sasuke rolled his eyes and tossed Naruto the scrolls. The redhead quickly put them in his pouch and drew out his three-pronged kunai and took to the trees with his team. Along the way, they encountered a hidden rain team. Hand over your scroll, the genin said from beneath his mask. Like hell I will. Naruto sped through hand seals. Fuden. Datapa. Naruto took a deep breath and shot it out in the form of a giant wave. The spiraling Kazemi added more volume and depth to the attack. The rain genin watched it head for him with wide eyes. The attack connected with its mark, and blew the genin into a large tree, embedding him into the base of the tree. That was a little too easy. Naruto gave a wry laugh and continued on his journey to the tower. An hour later. You know. Those foxes were a challenge. Orochimaru hissed from behind. It took me a little over a good hour to finally beat them. Orochimaru shot a large bundle of snakes from his sleeve. The snakes hit Sasuke and Sakura multiple times and sent them flying into a tree. Orochimaru had a mission. He wanted that Sharingan even if it was the last thing he did. Orochimaru extended in neck to bite Sasuke on his shoulder, but something unexpected happened. That. Naruto kawaramide with Sasuke. Naruto pushed Sakura out of the way. Orochimaru was moving too quickly and ended up sinking his teeth into Naruto's neck. Naruto's went wide as his body was filled with tainted power. Almost immediately, the mindscape that held Kushina and Kuro was experiencing an infestation of snakes. Kushina drew out a katana and Kuro transformed into her human form. Back in the outside world, Orochimaru was actually fine with the change of plans. The Kazemi was the only dujutsu that could rival the Sharingan in power. He retracted his head and turned his attention to the other two genin, but he found that they were gone. Not only that, but he couldn't sense their presence. Orochimaru was surprised. It was either they were hiding their chakra, which was highly unlikely, or they were moving too fast to be sensed. Chidori. Sakura and Sasuke's voices sounded at the same time as two little children appeared at Orochimaru's sides, with their hands covered in lightning. It happened in a split second, and Orochimaru now had two hands embedding into his body. Both hands were drenched in his blood. Orochimaru coughed, but smiled at the genin and shed his body. Bastard! What have you done to me? Naruto was struggling to stand up straight. His Kazemi started spiraling to speeds unknown. Naruto, enraged, started shooting off multiple barrages of water, lightning and wind mixed together. The attacks were tearing through the forest, but each attack was dodged or blocked by the ever-evasive Sannin. Naruto suddenly collapsed and fell to his knees and passed out. Naruto. A few hours later, Team 7 was exhausted, and they were down a scroll since they had to give it up for easy passage. Sakura and Sasuke were down on chakra and Naruto was out. Naruto, on the other hand, though, was literally having an internal battle with himself, or rather for himself against foreign enemies that invaded his system. In his mindscape, Naruto-kun, Kushina screamed. She drew out a three-pronged kunai and hurled it through the air. The kunai sliced off the head of an attacking snake that Naruto missed. The redhead nodded his head and channeled his Kitsune Senjutsu chakra, turning his Rasengan blood red, instead of the normal blue. Naruto charged forward and shoved his Rasengan into the underbelly of a 20-foot-tall king cobra snake. The three have been fighting the snakes for what seemed to be days, when in reality it has only been an hour. Kura was in her nine-tailed fox mode and was battling against a 200-foot anaconda that had invaded the mindscape. Her tails quickly wrapped around the massive slithering monster and ripped it apart, but the strange thing about it was that every time Kura would cause damage to it, the snake would only multiply each half. Each half would split in half and each half of that half would grow back to its original size. Kushina was struggling by herself against an onslaught of snake clones. She really wished she had her swords right now. She held her katana out to her right side with the blade pointing outward. She channeled Charka to her feet and threw up a one-handed hand seal. Shunpo. She vanished and reappeared behind the snake clones. A second later, the clones exploded in blood, and fell apart. She ducked a snake's bite and kicked another clone in the throat. She jumped up and rammed her knee in its face and shoved her sword into its chest. 5 more snake clones formed and started charging for her. She let the sword go and back-flipped off of the dead clone and rammed her fist into one of the clone's jaws, sending it flying. Naruto went through a series of back-flips and reached into his holsters and sent off barrage after barrage of kunai. Snakes and snake clones were torn apart, but he was close to running out. He activated the Kazemi and started channeling lightning and water together and sending vortex after vortex into the massive waves of snakes. It seemed that everything they did would only cause more and more snakes to come out from the massive seal on the wall. Kura went back to her human form and jumped onto a snake clone's head and shoved a blood-red Rasengan into its chest, completely blowing the chest out of its back. Kura landed and barrel rolled while slashing out with her tails. Naruto saw this and nodded at the idea, and his tails shot out, grabbing onto different snakes and ripping their heads off. One of his other tails shot off and impaled a snake clone. Naruto swung the damned clone off and threw the collapsing corpse off of his body and sent it flying to another wave of incoming snakes. Kushina pushed her son out of the way and beheaded a 10-foot-long king cobra snake and kicked the head into another equally long snake. Kushina bent back to dodge an incoming dash from a python. Naruto and Kura turned around and both forced their Rasengan into the snake's head, vaporizing the snake's head into nothing. Kura grabbed Kushina with her tails and threw her up into the air. Haijutsu. Kuchio's no jutsu. Kushina spun in the air and a large series of seal matrices spread in midair. Suddenly a convocation of eagles shot from the massive white smoke blast. Almost immediately, the snakes were finally getting beaten back. Kushina landed on top of Kura's 9-tailed fox form. Kushina waited a moment to get her bearings straight and jumped off of the 9-tailed fox's head. As she landed, she cut off the head of a snake clone. Naruto jumped into the air with his tail swinging about. Something was different though. The boy had a Rasengan in each hand and there was a Rasengan in each tail tip. The only explanation was that he was holding them down with Senjutsu and he was maintaining them with the Kazemi. Naruto's target was a 50-foot-long boa constrictor. The snake didn't know what was coming. Naruto sent all 9 tails that had a Rasengan of normal blue color. The balls of chakra forced the snake's head down into the ground. As he descended, he forced more chakra into the 2 Rasengan in his hands and they grew to be a little over a meter in diameter. Naruto forced the 2 big ball Rasengans into the snake's head, disintegrating it at the molecular level. Naruto looked up to see the seal was still fabricating massive amounts of snakes. He sighed and looked to his mother. In the outside world, Sasuke had just left for some firewood, but hasn't returned and Sakura was getting worried. The forest was playing cruel tricks to her mind. She looked up to the sky to see that the sun was still up. She walked over to the sleeping Naruto. She was worried. The poor redhead had a ridiculous fever of over 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Sakura knelt down and placed a rag of water on his forehead to try and soothe the pain. She placed her hands on his chest and started channeling medical ninjutsu to calm his racing heartbeat. I hope you'll get better, Ni-san. Sakura sighed. She had no idea what Naruto was going through. She channeled more of her chakra to at least slow down his heart rate, but she ultimately stopped knowing full well that it was of no use. She shut her eyes and started meditating. After the C-rank missions started flowing for their team, Sakura got slightly religious and started praying for their team to whatever deity she could think of. At this current moment she was praying to the great goddess Amaterasu for her guidance. Sakura. A voice hissed from outside of the tree roots. The girl reached into her kunai pouch and drew out a kunai and walked out with a cautious pace. She eyed her surroundings nervously. She looked to see Sasuke beaten up and bloodied. His arms were wrapped around Ino's shoulder and Shikamaru's shoulder. Behind them Choji was carrying a large bundle of firewood. Ino and Shikamaru laid the Uchiha against the tree roots and Sakura went straight to work on her wounded boyfriend. Naruto. Ino gasped. Is he okay? Ino dropped down to Naruto's side and placed a hand on his forehead, but quickly retracted it. She blew on her hands and sped through a quick jutsu. Suiten. Bankai no Jutsu. Water started from the wet cloth multiplied and a large bubble of water formed in Ino's hands. She used her chakra to continue to increase the amount of water and soon enough, she was able to wrap the bubble around Naruto's torso and legs. Everything but his head was inside of the water bubble. Raiden. Chiyu Habana no Jutsu, a spark of lightning spread throughout the water bubble. The electricity made his failing organs turn over and kick-start the body's normal systems. Behind them Shikamaru and Choji were making the fire spark to life. Then they heard it. 3 douchebag genin from the land of sound plopped out and looked at the 2 Konoha teams with a wry look on their faces. One was hunched over and looked reminiscent to a mummy, another was wearing a helmet that framed his face, and the last was a kunoichi that looked somewhat scared. Choji and Shikamaru got into fighting stances and drew kunai. Ino left Naruto to heal, leaving Sakura as the team medic to finish healing up Sasuke, who happened to be the strongest combat shinobi of the 6 present. Team 10 got into formation with Ino behind Shikamaru and Choji to the side. Ino sped through a series of quick hand seals. Rantan. Reiza Sakasu. Lasers shot out from her hands and channeled towards her targets. The Oto shinobi were about to dodge the attacks, but Shikamaru's shadows came out and bound each one to their spot. The 3 Oto shinobi smiled. The attacks hit, but they phased through each genin. They were bunchins. Suddenly, Shikamaru was blown back by an unknown force and was drilled through a tree. Choji was about to retaliate, but he was slashed in the face by an invisible blade. Choji! Sasuke shouted. She pushed Sakura off and activated his Sharingan and punched forward, knocking the girl from the tree she was hiding behind. Sasuke was pissed. Not only were his closest friends beaten like nothing, but his hopefully future sister-in-law Ino was in danger, and not only would that put Sasuke in a pit of undying despair, but Naruto would most undoubtedly kill him. Sasuke had little chakra left and was borderline chakra exhaustion. The mummy boy came around and lodged his metal gauntlet in Sasuke's chest, sending him back into the tree that housed Naruto's sleeping form. Naruto, wake up! Sasuke shouted out in pain. Naruto! Ino screamed. She jumped away when the helmet-wearing genin attacked. He had a large grin spread across his face. His hair was spiky and the strange thing about him was that he had a hole in the center of his palms. The boy focused chakra into the holes, and blades made from chakra formed and he started slashing for the beautiful blonde. Ino weaved in between each attack and sent a few strikes of taijutsu, each strike connecting without a hitch. Ino jumped back and lodged her fist into the genin's chin. She sped through some hand seals and used the last of her chakra before she completely depleted herself. She was able to save just enough to keep her afloat at least until help arrives. She finished the jutsu hand seals and slowly, a stream of water flowed from her mouth and built up in her hand like a sword. Sweden. Mizu Ken no Jutsu. The water sharpened and gained a thickness at where the blade was supposed to be. She shut her eyes and held the sword of water steady. Zaku came back around and sent a few blasts of chakra-enhanced wind blades. Ino jumped back after remembering what the blades could do after sparring with Naruto so much. But instead of the blades of wind aiming for kill hits, they were aimed for buttons and straps. Ino's eyes widened when she realized what he was aiming for. Soon enough Dosu, the mummy came out and hit her with a sound genjutsu. Ino was immobilized and Zaku shot off another blast cutting Ino's shirt clean off revealing her bra and bandages wrapping all around her torso. You bastards! Sakura sped through hand seals using up the last of her chakra. Doden. Doryuso no Jutsu. Spears of earth shot from around Sakura and shot straight for the perverted Odo shinobi. They easily dodged it since Sakura didn't have enough chakra to strengthen them enough. Dosu and Zaku walked up to Sakura and started wailing on her. Sasuke passed out not too long ago from his injuries and the fact that he had little to no chakra left. Ino was dazed from being nearly raped. Shikamaru and Choji were knocked out completely. In Naruto's mindscape, Udama Rasengan, Naruto jumped up into the air and destroyed the giant snake head that he was previously riding on. The snake exploded leaving Naruto to free fall towards the ground from nearly 300 feet in the air. As he started closing the distance between the ground and himself, an eagle summon came to the rescue and caught him just before he hit the ground. The eagle also took a few snakes with it to digest. All around, eagles and snakes were battling it out. Naruto focused his Kazemi and started sending tornadoes of lightning-enhanced water and wind towards the more larger snakes, like the nearly 1,000-foot-long snake that Kuro was struggling against. Throughout the fight Naruto had one question. How big is my mindscape? The eagle swooped down and dropped Naruto off next to his mom, who at this point, was drenched in snake entrails and blood, with no end in sight. Suddenly from the outside world there was a cry for help that sounded like Sasuke and Ino. Help! It was definitely Ino. Naruto felt his anger spike and his tail shot out and tore through a large group of mambas that had surrounded them. Naruto started channeling his Fox Senjutsu chakra to the point that it started overflowing. The chakra was so intense in heat that the snakes were starting to disintegrate. Naruto punched forward sending a ball of wind that was infused with bright red flames. Naruto's eyes suddenly changed. The originally three-dot formation changed to that of a rhombus. The colors also changed. Instead of the light purple mixed with sapphire, his eyes lightened and it became light purple with a lighter shade of cerulean. He could feel his power rising with this new eye. He smiled brightly when he realized that he had unlocked the Tsutomu Mi. He clenched his fist and suddenly, the air was edged from the snake clone's lungs. The water that flowed from within the snakes was evaporated and the electricity that flowed from their brain to their nerves was disrupted and disappeared. Go, Naruto! Kura screamed out to him as she shoved a Bijudama down the 1,000-foot-long snake's gullet. Me and Kushi-chan will hold them off for now. Alright, Naruto shouted out in rage. Out in the real world, Sakura's face was swollen and bloodied and she was starting to lose her shirt. Her wrists were broken and her left arm dislocated by the rapists. Ino was frozen in her place. Her eyes devoid of color. Sakura continued to squirm and scream out for help, but none came. But then there was a massive chakra spike that seemed to scare everyone silent, and scared Ino from her daze. All heads turned to the tree to see it glowing with a malicious black and red color. Naruto walked from it covered in red tattoos that resembled flames. Naruto was awash in a bright red chakra flame that scared the two-sound ninja off of Sakura. Naruto kept his eyes closed. His tails were swishing about, tearing through the landscape, but it was a reserved and concentrated destruction though. Power flowed through Naruto, tainted or not. Naruto liked the power, but he had more pressing matters to attend to. Sakura, Ino, Naruto said. He looked at them with his bangs covering his eyes from view. Did those pricks do this to you too? Naruto asked with a deep and demonic baritone to his voice. Ino ran to Sakura and nodded her head and went straight away to heal her best friend's face. Naruto turned his attention to the two in front of him. They both had wide grins on their faces, but they weren't willing to attack first. Feel the wrath of the Tsutomu. Naruto clenched his fists, ing the air from their lungs. The two dropped to their knees, but Naruto forced the water in their system to keep them standing. Naruto blew them back with a blast of wind and pinned them onto the tree behind. My eyes can see the future. You wanna know what yours is? The two were coughing and gasping for air. Painful, excruciatingly painful deaths. Naruto sent his tails off and started rapidly stabbing Dosu's body, each tail tearing and burning his flesh with every stab. When Dosu died, he forced the healing spark technique into his body, bringing him back to life, so Naruto could further desecrate his body. Dosu screamed and screamed. He screamed like he never had in his life. Naruto ended Dosu's life after he begged for 10 minutes straight. Both Team 7 and Team 10 were awake and watching the entire scene unfold. Dosu's head was ripped off of his body by one of Naruto's tails and stabbed through one of Sakura's earth spears embedded into the ground. Naruto summoned up a few fox summons to dispose of the genin's body. The boys looked at Naruto with both fear and respect. Once the foxes finished ingesting the remains of Dosu, Naruto turned to face Zaku. You beat and tried to rape my sister. That's a no. Then you tried to rape my girlfriend. You are a dead man. Zaku started crying and looked at Naruto with complete unrestrained fear. Naruto sent off large blades of wind that sliced through Zaku's body, but didn't go all the way through. Zaku coughed out blood and looked around and nodded to his female team member hiding out. She charged for Naruto with a kunai in hand, but Naruto's tail shot out and tore through her chest, impaling her heart, killing her instantly. One of his other tails drew a kunai and sliced the kunoichi's head off and stabbed her head in a pike next to Dosu's head. The foxes charged out and started mauling through Kin's dead body. The smell of blood became overly apparent, and Naruto seemed to be loving it. Naruto turned around, with Zaku still stuck to the large tree, and spotted a large spike sticking up from the ground, from when Sakura first charged up the earth spear jutsu. Naruto smiled to himself and his tail shot out to Zaku and tore his limbs off, leaving him as a torso. Every genin present screamed out when Naruto did it so suddenly. Zaku didn't even get to scream. Naruto dropped Zaku's body in front of Sakura and Ino. Naruto gave the two healers a look and they understood immediately. Ino and Sakura started healing his stumps, and stopped the blood flow. The boys of the group were sick from the sight of so much blood, but Ino and Sakura felt no remorse. Naruto lifted the body up by his tails and stuck his body down through the large spike of earth. The tip tearing through his groin and tearing through and stopping at his mid-abdomen, just where the bottom of the stomach resided in his gut. Blood poured down the spike, leaving Zaku to stare aimlessly at the sky and contemplate his life. He trailed his eyes down to see the foxes feasting on his limbs. This was a terrible way to die. Naruto looked at his friends and instantly the malicious and tainted chakra was ed back into his body. Naruto gripped his head as the chakra started disappearing. The tattoos resided to the seal on his neck, and his dark eyes returned back to their normal dark purple and cerulean. Ino caught his body just before he hit the ground. She and Sasuke picked him up and led him back into the shelter made from roots of the tree. Sleep tight, Naruto-kun. Ino kissed his cheek and laid down next to him as tears started forming in her eyes. She couldn't help it. Naruto had just murdered 3 genin. Even though it was with good reason, it was still murder. Please be safe. In Naruto's mindscape, Naruto stabbed upwards and shoved his kunai into the snake's jaw, killing it instantly. He tore the blade from the head and focused wind chakra into his kunai, extending the blade to make it into a sword. He pulled out another and did the exact same. He focused wind in every step he took, giving him extra speed. His thousands of clones still battling it out with his mom and Kurane. He slashed in a wide arc, cutting off the heads of 15 rattlesnakes. He formed another battalion of clones and sent them off to go snake hunting with eagles at their side. Kushina was spitting out fire jutsu after fire jutsu. The snakes that attacked were incinerated whenever they got too close. She lost her sword a few days ago and she was relying on her jutsu and taijutsu to beat the snakes back into the seal. The good thing about it was that all of the snakes were manageable 5 to 20 foot long snakes. She drew a few 3-prong kunai and hurled them out in wide arcs and mixed shuriken into each attack. Kura shrunk back to her human form and pulled out a special kunai that Naruto had seen before, but the poor redhead couldn't remember where. Kura hurled the kunai and the knife embedded in a snake clone's face, but the knife exploded and multiplied into nearly 300 similar kunai. Kura smiled and disappeared in a bright blood-red flash and started tearing through everything in a 20-yard by 20-yard area. Naruto looked over at Kura and saw nothing but red flashes going off everywhere. He was scared but thought back to when he first asked Kura to teach him the Haraishin. She flatly told him no and said that he was too young, and his body hadn't matured enough to withstand the pressure of going at near light speed. She also said that Naruto wasn't cool enough yet. As if being cool is something to use to judge potential students. They 3 were making great progress so far and the reaches of Orochimaru's cursed seal was being removed and as of now, the snakes were no longer on the offensive. After fighting for a near month straight in his mindscape, and only being asleep for a night in the real world, Naruto gained large amounts of combat experience. Already he had slaughtered over 1 million snakes when he let his anger get the best of him. With the Tsutomu, he was able to turn the tide almost instantly. He shot 4th A ranked ninjutsu for nearly 3 days straight in the mindscape, tearing up the area and killing everything in his path. Kura shot Bijudama after Bijudama and Kushina sent off her low-leveled techniques and leveled nearly half the battlefield. At first when the invasion first started, they were at the cage which was the finish line. If the snakes were able to get to the gate, who knows what they would do to the cage and the seal. But that was nearly a month ago in the mindscape. They at first could only barely see the large cursed seal floating against the wall on the far side of the corridor. The reason that Kura could fight without being restrained by the cage, was the fact that the seal was changed into a collar. Everything about the mindscape changed. They were fighting in a large short grassed plain with a jungle in the distance and large mountain with the cursed seal of heaven drawn across the mountainside. It was still barely visible and the 3 had over 200 miles to go. Each mile was infested with snakes and more snakes, since the cursed seal happened to be fabricating them in vast multitudes. They poured from the Tomo design of the seals and oozed out into the jungle below the mountainside. At first they thought it wouldn't be possible, but Kushina got smart and summoned her eagles, which happened to have a taste for snakes. So now, they could see the cursed seal radiating tainted energy and its fabrication of snakes had slowed down. The forest was leveled completely and the 3 started channeling their most powerful long-ranged attacks to override the cursed seal. Kura formed a Bijudama again and Kushina formed hand seals and Naruto's Tsutomu was spinning wildly. Kura shot the ball of mass destruction, Kushina sent a tsunami of fire, and Naruto shot off the largest storm he had ever concocted with the Tsutomu, causing his eyes to dry and start bleeding. The storm mixed with the tsunami of fire and turned the once powerful storm into an apocalyptic inferno. The firestorm collided with the cursed seal, instantly weakening its protective barrier. The Bijudama followed through and smashed into the cursed seal's central tomo, severing all connection with Orochimaru and snakes in general, leaving Naruto with all of the power it has. The eagles landed in front of Kushina and perched in tree branches and other types of perches. The hundreds of thousands of Naruto clones collapsed finally and dispelled in mass numbers, overflowing Naruto's mind with all of their memories and kills. Naruto fell flat on his butt and instantly thought of some shade and a nice pretty beach to go to. Almost immediately, the scenery changed and a large glisteningly beautiful beach formed with a volcano right behind them and an extremely large beach house. There was another jungle that formed, this time thick enough to become the home for the eagle summons. Ka-chan. Just in case so you don't feel lonely, and if the snakes do return, you'll always have eagles to rely on. Naruto smiled, but then came to a thought. What happens to the eagles born here in my mindscape? Are they a figment of my imagination, or are they creations within my mind from another source, which happens to be stuck in my mind, thus still a figment of my imagination? Shut up, Naruto-kun. You're confusing. Now go wake up. We've been fighting for so long. Kushina left Naruto and Kura followed suit. Eagles were flying about and building nests within the jungle biome. Naruto continued to lay on the sandy beach without a care. The wind felt nice and the warm beach water felt like heaven to his toes. As much as Naruto liked the almost limitless power that he was gifted, Naruto didn't want tainted power. He wanted that cursed seal gone. Out in the real world, nighttime had just fallen and the daybreak was calm and crisp. The team's male members had just returned after a successful hunt and were currently cooking the rabbits and other animals that they caught in their traps. Sakura and Ino were still tending to the fever-ridden Naruto. He was still out, but at least his temperature lowered to only 110 degrees. His cursed seal also couldn't stop changing, to the point that instead of it being black, the seal turned blood red, and then the entire seal dyed a dark purple, much like his eyes were. Sakura had regained her chakra overnight and formed a large mud wall that surrounded them, much like a fortress. For about 20 yards in every direction, there were traps and tripwires. All over the place, they made sure to leave no area unprotected. Explosive tags they found in Naruto's pouch were placed on trees and underground. They even attached them to kunai in the traps just in case they were tripped. Ino walked away from Naruto and sighed at his condition. They are only supposed to be in the forest for only 5 days, one day already passed. Even though it was highly productive at the start, Team 7 was knocked down many pegs and was down a scroll. Man, Naruto's voice sounded from beneath the tree. Everyone shot up and sped for Naruto. Hey, what happened? You did that. Everyone pointed at the savagely mutilated bodies of the 3 sound genin. You also kinda left those 3 behind. There were 3 5-tailed kitsune summons with purple and black fur. They weren't that large either, probably the size of a normal fox. They were sitting at his feet with happy expressions. Naruto tilted his head slightly in surprise and wondered why they were still here. Naruto sat up, expecting excruciating pain, but he felt nothing. Naruto shrugged and stood up and stretched. One of the foxes jumped at Naruto's side and started in his hand. Everyone looked in confusion. The fox was, in reality, just an overgrown kit. The fox soon looked to the other 2 and they joined in. They liked the smell of Naruto apparently. The tails and the ears were also a dead giveaway. Naruto thought about it for a bit and dropped down in a meditative stance and channeled his nature chakra. He sensed the foxes doing the same. In Naruto's mindscape, the blonde opened his eyes to see his mother sitting in a beach chair and Kura playing with some of the foxes created in the jungle, which was weird, since foxes don't live in the jungle. Monkeys and tropical birds were going about through the beach and trees, leaving Kura with a lot to do. Naruto smiled at how peaceful it was and headed over to Kura with the three fox kits at his side. Kura nay. I need you for something. Naruto called out. Suddenly Kura popped her beautiful face out of the water. Naruto face faulted when Kura appeared to have a live fish in her mouth, while still in her human form. Kura apparently just doesn't give a. She hopped over to Naruto and smiled at him before spitting the fish from her mouth. Almost immediately, the foxes came out and started tearing through the fish. What is it, Naru-kun? Kura asked. She looked down and instantly got the message. The foxes looked at Kura with a weird expression and smiled like idiots. They channeled some senjutsu chakra and sat upright. Their bodies soon changed to reveal three girls just as old as Naruto with long flowing black and red hair with purple, regent kimonos. The katanas at their sides had elaborate designs of foxes swiveling around the scabbard, and the handle was the open mouth of a fox. The cool thing about the katanas was that they were chokuto styled. In other words, straight-bladed katanas. Naruto blushed brightly when he realized that the three were extremely beautiful girls with wonderful hair. They turned to face Naruto and they each had whisker marks like he did. Their fox ears were purple and their 5 fox tails were purple with the tips black. To Naruto's surprise, their chests were actually well developed, but then again, they were fox summons that have probably been alive for centuries. Naruto was forced from his reverie and looked at the three kitsune. Their eyes were the same color, blood red. Naruto chuckled slightly and looked to Kura for an explanation. Well, Naruto-kun. Look at the kitsune that we have here. Kura smiled. The three girls turned and bowed to Kura. Yoko, the defender. The tallest on with the curly hair stood up and smiled. Seiko, the soldier. The middle with short hair looked up and nodded her head. And last, Fujika, the assassin. The last and shortest with the ponytail like Ino looked up and smiled brightly. Who are they, Kurane? Naruto asked. Naruto-sama. Yoko turned around and gave him a smile. We are here to protect you and each of your destined mates. What do you mean by mates, as in the plural form? Naruto choked. Naruto, I think you need to be told about something that happened in Wave and not too long ago on one of your C-ranked missions. Kushina said with a bright smile. What happened? Naruto asked. It just so happens that in Wave, while Naruto was knocked out, Haku apparently found some of his red hair and wrapped it around her wrist for good luck. Kushina went on to explain the red thread of fate deal to Naruto. Those who were tied by the red thread of fate were destined to be lovers. Kushina then went on to explain that on one of his missions with Team 10, when Naruto got extremely injured, Ino wrapped some of Naruto's hair that she found around her wrist and prayed for luck. Seeing as how there are 3, you will have 3 wives. Kushina said. TTT3. Naruto was breathless. Naru-sama. Seiko chose to speak up. The great elder fox said that you'd have 3 wives. She didn't say who the third one would be, but she sent us to protect you and the 2 so far. But, Naruto's head hurt, which was made obvious by the raging volcano in the distance. Alright, wait, will you 3 be in human form, or will you be in fox form? Whichever you or your mates feel comfortable with. Fujika said with a bright smile. Out in the real world, Naruto and the 3 kits awoke from their meditation and had finished replenishing his chakra. The 3 foxes shot up and looked at the girls in front of him. Almost immediately, Fujika shot for Ino. The youngest kit jumped up and slung itself around Ino's neck. The blonde was surprised at first but got used to it after a while. Naruto popped his neck and stretched again. Alright, let's go. Naruto smiled to everyone. Let's head to that tower. Wait. Shikamaru grabbed Naruto with the cage mane. Your team is down a scroll. What? Naruto was flabbergasted. We had to give up one of our scrolls for safe passage yesterday. Sasuke grumbled. We were down on chakra and fighting strength. Oh, okay. Naruto shrugged and Sakura lowered the earth wall to reveal the dark forest around them. Naruto and the 3 kitsune focused their sage chakra. Almost immediately, they sensed the 4-tailed Biju chakra signature in the distance. Naruto and the three kitsune jumped up and took to the trees. Naruto suddenly felt a crazy mishap in the senjutsu radar. Shit. Scatter. Suddenly a flurry of fireballs shot through the forest and collided with trees and branches. But the difference was that the balls didn't explode in flame like they normally would, but instead, the spheres melted into lava and ate through the trees. Naruto jumped ahead and sent a blast of wind at an incoming lava ball and cooled it down enough. But the ball of lava turned into a boulder that smashed into Naruto, sending him down to the ground, which happened to be 40 feet below him. Naruto-sama, Yoko shouted and sent her tails out. Her tails wrapped around Naruto's and grabbed her master up. She swung him around and softly lowered him onto a branch. Naruto focused wind in his feet and disappeared in a swift motion, leaving his teammates and comrades to dodge the non-stop hailstorm of lava balls. When Naruto reappeared, he was at the foot of a clearing. Yuten. Yoryu Dangan no Jutsu. The one with the four tails, Chakra shouted. The boy had red hair in a short ponytail, with the same shirt as Naruto did, except the fact that it was brown and maroon. The genin had the hit I ate for Iwagakure. This kid had black eyes and an angry look on his face. He sped through a few more hand seals. Yuten. Yugen Dan no Jutsu. His targets were two teams from Kiri and Suna. Naruto was suddenly hit with two other Biju signatures. Ikibi and the Sanbi. Naruto immediately knew who the Ikibi was and charged down to meet them. The two teams went for evasive actions and dodged the large lava dragon and the barrage of lava bullets. When Naruto landed, he sent a blast of wind, and instantly cooled the attack down. Naruto jumped forward and sent a high-leveled lightning jutsu at the Yonbi Jinchuriki, but he went through another set of hand seals. Yuten. Yugen Kabe no Jutsu. The Jinchuriki took a deep breath and regurgitated a large blast of lava. The lava built up to form a wall and easily protected him from the lightning attack. The redhead jumped up and landed at the top of the now super-cooled wall and threw a flurry of shuriken and kunai. The Kiri team split up, leaving a boy with silver hair and pink-purple eyes, and Gaara's team split off, leaving the Ikibi Jinchuriki. I can sense 3 Biju right now. The genin smiled from atop his wall. Ikibi, Sanbi, Kyubi. All 3 genin below him looked in surprise. I am Rushi. No surname. Jinchuriki of the Yonbi. What are your names? The genin asked. Sabaku no Gaara. Jinchuriki of the Ikibi. Yagura. Jinchuriki of the Sanbi. I am Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto. Jinchuriki of the Kyubi. Rushi jumped off the wall with a smile. From the trees, Yagura's teammate gasped and blushed. She looked down at her wrist and lightly touched the strand of red hair wrapped around it. I want to see how well I fare against you 3. Rushi charged forward and punched for Gaara, but the ultimate defense came into play and blocked Rushi's lava-charged attack, and blew him back. Naruto quickly followed up with a few kunai slashes as he chased after him. Rushi ducked and weaved each attack, but was caught off guard when Naruto bashed him in the chest with one of his tails. Naruto followed up and wrapped the tail around Rushi's torso and threw him over to Gaara. The Ikibi Jinchuriki sent his sand out and caught the redhead and got ready to crush him. But the sand started melting. Gaara's eyes were wide and Yagura jumped back and drew out his pole arm. He spun it around and surprisingly, water built up at the hook tip. Yagura swung around once again and smashed the water into Rushi's lava. But the water suddenly sizzled and disappeared. Gaara pulled back his sand and stared with wide eyes. Rushi was hunched over. His skin seemed to be made from lava. Flames were shooting off of his body in ridiculous amounts. Rushi smiled like a maniac and suddenly a large tail sprouted from behind. The other 3 Jinchuriki jumped back and got into defensive stances. Naruto drew out 2 3-prong kunai and his Kitsune Guardians suddenly popped up next to him. Gaara had his ultimate defense ready and Yagura had water already building up at the tip of his pole arm. Rushi. A feminine shout resounded from the forest. Calm down. Don't get carried away. Yeah, we don't want this to get too out of hand. Another shout came. Naruto looked to see a burly Iwa shinobi and a beautiful short-haired Iwa kunoichi. She raised an eyebrow at the four Jinchuriki and laid her eyes on Naruto. She walked up to Rushi, pat him on the shoulder and walked up to the three in front of her. She sighed and reached into her pouch. But before she could pull out whatever she was reaching for, a flurry of kunai and shuriken were embedded at her feet. All eyes instantly shot up to see the rest of Team 7 and Team 10 on tree branches. They all jumped down and got into defensive positions. Give up your scroll. Sasuke narrowed his eyes as the Sharingan came to life. The rest of Yagura's and Gaara's teams came out from the forest and everyone drew their weapons. Sasuke and Sakura brightened when they saw a familiar face among Yagura's team. But there was something much more important at hand. The black-haired girl chuckled nervously and sighed. The name's Kurotsuchi. Which scrolls do you need, Uchiha-san? She replied politely. Earth. Everyone loosened up. Oh, all right. Here. She pulled out an earth scroll and tossed it to the Uchiha. I mean, you guys no harm. If you were able to make it here this quickly already, then that means that you guys are really good. Well then, Naruto said. He was about to say something else, but he was tackled in a flurry of wavy and curly hair. His side was black, but his nose was barraged with a familiar scent. Something he knew he'd never forget. Snow. He felt the lips touch his and instantly he knew who it was. Completely forgetting about the other teams watching intently, Naruto didn't even fight back against the kiss. Suddenly, color came back and he came to see Ino's face. So I'm guessing that you're Ino. Haku said with a smile. I'm Haku. Why you're Haku? Ino was mentally freaking out. No one told me that she was this beautiful. And what kind of perfume does she wear? It's like she rolls around in snow. She looked to see some red on Haku's wrist that seemed annoyingly similar to the hair wrapped around her own wrist. Ino's eyebrow ticked slightly but took a deep breath to allow Haku to explain. In the meantime, Sakura and was healing whatever wounds there happened to be on Gaara's, Yagura's and Rushi's team. He seems to be quite the ladies' man. Kurotsuchi giggled and started walking up to Naruto. I think I'll get to know him. She plopped down next to the beet red redhead. The moment Naruto turned to look at her, she was turned into a potato. No form of cognitive function. She stared aimlessly into his purple cerulean eyes. The depth, the color, the mystery. She doesn't blush, nor did she ever think she will, since almost nothing impresses her. Being the granddaughter of the Tsuchikage does that, but she felt the sudden urge to. Naruto's bright smile and tanned skin made her wonder. His tails also seemed to work like actual tails, but had a wonderful combat use. She noticed the little quirks in his face every time he'd say something. The little eyebrow twitch and the small dimple on his cheeks when he does smile. She made a quick peek at his chest and instantly let her emotional walls break and a mad blush formed on her cheeks. She turned her eyes away and started allowing sound to enter her ears again. She looked to where Naruto was laughing and pointing to and saw that Haku and Ino were hurling jutsu at each other while at the same time screaming stuff that had the same effect of saying, "He's mine," or, "Get your own nine-tailed redhead." Kurotsuchi smiled at how such powerful kunoichi could still be women. So, Kurotsuchi-san, your name seems familiar, Naruto said. He looked to her for an answer. Her eyes widened slightly when she realized that Naruto was talking to her. She noted that his tails reflect whatever emotion he felt. Her blush was still there, but Naruto didn't notice. I am a descendant of a cage, just as you are. She looked away with her cheeks still on fire. I'm the granddaughter of the Tsuchikage. T Tsuchikage. Naruto choked. L like Unoki the fence-sitter Tsuchikage. Yup. Kurotsuchi beamed. I know. I'm surprised that the old man is still alive too. I mean, Naruto couldn't help but to chuckle at her remark. But, my father fought your father then. Kitsuchi. Kuro asked. Why yeah, Kitsuchi son of the great fence-sitter. Naruto coughed. I read up on my father's journals and notes about his life and he spoke of the children of Unoki-sama himself in great multitude and with the utmost respect, same with the Raikage's sons I and B. Really? This got the Iowa Genin's attention. Yeah, Naruto replied. My father didn't want to fight any of you. He in truth wanted to end the war as quickly as possible, but there were so many people opposed to his ideal of peace. So he, by order of the village and the alliance at the time, had to use his most powerful jutsu to fight. He wrote in his personal journals about how he was amazed at the tenacity of Iwagakure and their strong-willed shinobi. The three Iwa genin smiled at that. He went on to say that he was stupefied by the speed of Kumo and their specialized wolf summons. So, all of the bedtime stories of the terrifying Namikaze Minato were false. Rushi and Akatsuchi asked. Of course. Naruto said. My father actually loved Iwagakure and Kumogakure. My clan, the Namikaze, originated from the Land of Lightning before it was even called the Land of Lightning. The Iwa genin suddenly felt a great wave of guilt wash over them. Rushi more than the other two. Not only that, but my dad thinks that Unoki's dust release is, and I quote, badass as. Naruto laughed when he saw Kurotsuchi's smile spread wide. Your dad seems like a swell guy. Kuro replied. Suddenly the all-out spar between the two girls trying to court Naruto ended abruptly and they stopped to glare at the Iwa Kunoichi talking to Naruto. Kurotsuchi was drowned in ridiculous amounts of killer intent. Thousands of times more than when Han would go on rampages. She shrunk and slid away from Naruto. Ino and Haku then quickly dashed for the redhead and wrapped their arms around him and started grabbing at his shirt. Almost immediately Naruto wanted to stop the argument, since this was his only shirt packed. For some strange reason, life liked to with him and make him loose his clothing. Suddenly, Ino and Haku's fingernails pierced his shirt and started tearing. Ino pulled Naruto towards her, but Haku pulled back. Ino shouted something completely incoherent and pulled even harder and bent the metal plate, which was supposed to be indestructible. Haku pulled back and actually ripped the metal halfway, taking the iron mesh and the cloth with it. Soon enough they pulled at the same time, completely tearing his shirt off to reveal muscles, abs, and basically any love-struck girl's dream. WWWWW. Ino was again a bumbling flesh bag. Haku was as red as a tomato, and Kuro got turned into a potato again, and soon enough, Tamari while she was in her conversation with Shikamaru, stopped and was entranced with the hunk of a shinobi sitting with three very scary women around him. Sakura got over his body and concentrated on healing the burns on Rushi's arms. Naruto's face was as red as his hair, but shot up to his feet and looked at the 11 other ninja present. So, Naruto awkwardly coughed. Let's get going, shall we? I'm pretty much done healing Rushi's burns, Gaara's broken bones and Yagura's burns as well. Sakura smiled and wiped her hands together. Let's go. At the tower, the four teams arrived just before sundown with the required scrolls. Team 7 tossed their scrolls out and Iruka popped up from it. They had a little talk and the academy instructor left shortly after, leaving Naruto with 3 days of nothing. He walked over to the Iowa team to see them talking with their sensei, which just so happened to be Kitsuchi himself. Naruto walked up there and wanted to introduce himself to the man, but Kurotsuchi turned and gave him a look that said, "Stay away." The redhead nodded his head and headed off for his room. Upon entering he was attacked by Ino and Haku. Both girls placing kisses on his cheeks and neck. They kept kissing him and ravaged his face like he was meat for starved animals. He looked over to the door of the room and saw Yoko, Seiko and Fujika sitting and minding their own business. But then Naruto had a sudden revelation. Yoko the defender looked almost exactly like Haku. He started seeing images of Haku's style of fighting and realized that Yoko was to represent Haku. Seiko the soldier looked like Kurotsuchi. He had a flashback and realized the type of skills Iwa Shinobi had and found that it was highly appropriate for her to have Seiko. Finally was Fujika the assassin. He read up on Yamanaka fighting styles and strategies. They were perfect assassins and made perfect use with their mind transfer techniques. Naruto's eyes widened when he realized who his future wives were going to be. Holy shit! Naruto let himself get devoured by his lovable girlfriend and sort of girlfriend. A few hours later, Naruto was awoken by the sound knocking. Naruto sat up from his bed and smiled, remembering that his lovers left the room an hour ago. He rubbed his eyes with his tails to readjust to the darkness of night. He slid out of his bed and walked up to the window and opened it when he saw Kurotsuchi's face. She sighed in relief and hopped into his room. She had a distraught face. "What's wrong, Kuro-chan?" Naruto asked. That made it even harder for her to tell him. She took a deep breath and looked at Naruto with teary eyes. She never cries, nor does she ever care for others, but this random kid had done that to her. The toughest kunoichi in all of Iowa never felt emotions like these. Her heart pounded when she looked at him. She sighed and grabbed Naruto in for a hug, surprising him and her, when she realized how buff he actually was. "I have something to tell you." Kurotsuchi took another deep breath. "Iowa, Oto and Kumo are working together to invade Konoha during the finals, and their main target is me," Naruto replied, causing Kurotsuchi to pale. "I have the Tsutomu me. I can see the future." He tapped his face to exaggerate the point. I'm sorry." Kurotsuchi turned her back to Naruto, but she was grabbed by his tails and turned to face him. Her face had a soft tint of blush. I was sent to kill you. Stuttering doesn't suit you," Naruto said with a smirk. "And I know. Remember, I can see the future." "Why yeah." Kurotsuchi blushed deeper when she took in his scent. She smiled when the moonlight glistened off of his well-toned body. Every bulge in his muscles and chest shadowed and accentuated by the white luminescent light from above. A cold breeze blew in from the open window. Kurotsuchi shivered and was brought closer to the redhead. She was instantly heated by his natural warmth. She blushed even harder. "I'm supposed to be a lava release user. I'm supposed to have high body heat. What is going on with me?" It was silent between them for the longest time. Naruto looked around while still keeping his would-be assassin warm. He found that the time was only 12 a.m. There was another breeze that came in, and this time it brought a lot of other objects, such as smoke from an explosion that went off in the forest and some flowers, which somehow got carried by the wind. Naruto, being the boyfriend of a florist, he knew that this specific type of flower wouldn't get carried by wind like that. It was as if Kami was breaking the laws of physics for something spontaneous to happen. "I'll close the window." Naruto chuckled and shut it tightly, but he felt a slight tug at one of his tails and turned around to face the only other occupant of the room. She had a bright smile on her face and a blush that followed after. She pointed up at the ceiling with a sly smile adorning her lips. Naruto was confused but then looked up to see that the flower was actually perfectly lodged between the ceiling tiles of his room. Logic 0. Fate 1. It seems that a Hanakotoba flower has found itself stuck above us, Kurotsuchi smiled strangely. Strange, since these flowers are grown exclusively in the land of rock. Logic 0. Fate 2. I know what they mean, Naruto said with a growing blush. My girlfriend, the blonde one with Rantan, she's a florist, she told me all about that flower, it seems we have to kiss. Logic 0. Fate 3. What are we waiting for? Kurotsuchi asked suggestively as she wrapped her arms around Naruto's neck and stood on her tippy toes. Logic 1. Fate 1,000,000 and infinity. Their lips touched and instantly they started making out like maniacs. Kurotsuchi's heart was rising to speeds unknown. Her first kiss was taken by her enemy and newest friend. Soon enough Naruto's tails wrapped affectionately around her back and held her closer to him. She didn't want to hold back, and apparently Naruto couldn't hold back. Their tongues battled and fought for dominance. They didn't realize it, but the flower suddenly disappeared. Logic 1. Fate everything. The next morning, Naruto and Kurotsuchi awoke in complete surprise. Kurotsuchi was missing a shirt and Naruto was still shirtless. His hair was messy and Kurotsuchi had love bites on her neck and arms. Naruto had a huge Iwa hiki, which apparently was a normal hiki imbued with lava. The highest form of attraction for a lava release shinobi or kunoichi to bestow upon another. Kurotsuchi was surprised that she even went that far. It was basically marking the receiver as your chosen mate since the mark was permanent. The Iwa Hiki was on Naruto's neck, in the most visible of places. It took a good 10 minutes for them to realize where they were, but then the events of what happened the night before came rushing in, and immediately the two's faces were bright red. Naruto's eyes bulged from his head and Kurotsuchi became a twitching mess. She looked around for her shirt and quickly threw it on. She looked at the time and paled. Naruto tried to fix his state of dress and help Kurotsuchi look somewhat better than what she looked already. It was so awkward in that room. But after a few minutes there was a call for Naruto's name and it sounded like both Haku and Ino. Both Naruto and Kurotsuchi froze in their tracks. She was still putting on her shinobi boots, and Naruto was still trying to find her Hitai-8. The door opened to reveal Haku and Ino standing there with blank expressions. Naruto's heart stopped and he immediately paled invisible. Color was non-existent in the young boy, and Kurotsuchi was faring no better. What's going on here, Naru-kun? Ino asked while trying to hide the obvious hurt in her voice. Tears were already forming in her eyes. Both Naruto and Kurotsuchi jumped at the chance to explain. A few hours later, Naruto was lying in his bed with an ice pack on his face formed thanks to Haku. The black-haired beauty laid Naruto's head on her lap while she nursed his bruised temples. Kurotsuchi was lying in his left arm while she tracing her fingers in the troughs between his abs with an aloof expression. In Naruto's other arm was Ino with an apologetic smile on her face as she healed his chest of broken bones. Not too long ago, Naruto had just finished the explanation of what happened the night before and then went on to explain to the three kunoichi of different villages what his three kitsune companions represented. The three foxes then went on to show off their human forms, surprising the three kunoichi present with how they looked. Haku smiled at her kitsune and commended the hair. Ino smiled and liked the makeup used by hers and Kurotsuchi liked how badass hers looked. After it all, Naruto knew that there was still tension. He took it upon himself and told the three girls that if there was any hard feelings that were felt between each other that they should take their frustration out on him. Naruto regretted that choice, but knew that he had to be a man and take it. Kurotsuchi and Ino went first and sent powerful haymakers into his chest, breaking 3 ribs instantly. Haku went after and kicked him in the gut. This went on for quite some time, but then here they were. Happy together and quiet. Naruto took a deep breath and shut his beating eyes. Haku sighed and pressed the ice pack a little harder and soon enough broke into a small song. Kurotsuchi soon joined in and Ino followed around the chorus. The three had amazing singing voices and kept Naruto in a melodic daze, completely forgetting his bruises and broken bones. In his mindscape, everything was still in the beach setting but it was changing to an even more heavenly setting. Oh Naruto-kun, 3 girlfriends. Kushina sighed and shook her head. I never thought it would happen. Don't worry Kushi-chan. It's still going to work well for him. Kura smiled cheekily. The two were happy that Naruto couldn't hear them. I know, but there's only one him. Kushina was hushed by Kura. Don't play that bullshit with me Kushi-chan. Kura smiled a devious smirk. Don't you remember all of those times you and Mina-kun would have those gang rape role-play nights and he'd use the cage bunshin? Gah. Kushina blushed so bright, it seemed to drown out the sun's own rays. No. Don't bring that up. I don't want my son to do that. No. Out in the real world. Naruto yawned and then realized that he was the only one still awake in the room. Ino was asleep with her hand lying on his right pectoral and Kurotsuchi with her hand on his left, and Haku lying on a pillow against the wall. Naruto instead of the conventional pillow, he used Haku's lap. He smiled at the amazing burst of scents from his girlfriend and girlfriends. Snow, crisp smell of fire and flowers. The next day, it was the last day of reprise and Naruto chose to leave his room for the first time since they got back. To everyone's surprise he was accompanied by not 1, but 3 women. Each female accompanied by a purple and black fox. Naruto sat down with all the teams that made it and was immediately barraged with questions. Naruto still had a migraine from the ass kicking he received from all three girls, but he also didn't eat for 3 days. He raised his hand and immediately everyone shut up. He looked down at his breakfast and started eating and eating. He couldn't stop eating and he didn't even like vegetables. He had no problem with the barbecue and rice, but he really wished he had ramen. After finishing his plate and drinking his cup of water empty, he sighed and turned his attention to the people present. He nodded his head and immediately, the questions started flying. So are you three? You know, Tamari asked. His girlfriends? She asked with a raised eyebrow. As a hardcore feminist, she didn't like the idea of polygamy. And no, all three girls stuttered. She is though. Kurotsuchi and Haku pointed to Ino. Yeah, we just had a little issue to sort out. Ino said while giving Naruto a look. We cleared out some problems and solved it like a couple would. Haku and Kurotsuchi smiled at Ino's lying abilities. In truth, they were his three girlfriends, but they didn't want to say anything about it in fear of what could happen. 1. Haku's father is Momochi Zabuza. Even though Naruto had no idea what became of him, he knew that Zabuza's threat was business, and 2. Kurotsuchi's father and grandfather were enough to be a challenge for both his father and the Sandame. Just imagine how much of a nightmare they would be to him. Oh, and they also wanted Naruto dead. But soon enough, the breakfast scene was over and everyone was led into a large arena of sorts within the tower. In front of them was a gigantic statue holding up the ram hand seal. Naruto did a quick recount since he felt that they were in the arena too early. In fact they were. The proctors found that the last team in the forest was defeated and bumped the match day up ahead of schedule. The teams stood with their team leaders at the front. It started off with Team 8 with Kiba up front. Next to them was Team 10 with Ino up front. Team 7 was next with Naruto at the helm. Gaara was next to him, then Yagura, Rushi, Neji, and at the far end was a blonde-haired girl that had the Nibi's chakra signature radiating within her. Behind her were two dark-skinned Kumo shinobi. One had red-headed kunoichi with long hair and the other had short blonde hair with a lollipop in his mouth. The two shinobi had swords on their backs. They looked to the front to see all 6 cages of the major nations. The Mizukage removed his hat to reveal a familiar face to Team 7. All 3 beamed smiles at the man. Next to the Mizukage was a darker-skinned and older version of Gaara. Hiruzen stood next to him. On Hiruzen's left was a man wearing a cage hat that had the kanji for sound. Next to the apparent Otokage, was Unoki floating like a badass and finally ending with the third Raikage in all of his powerful imposing figure. The giant lightning bolt-shaped scar on his chest scared a few of the not-so-educated genin. Alright, the proctor took a few moments to cough. Since there are too many of you here we will have to hold a preliminary match, the man coughed again. Wait, Uzumaki Namikaze-san. Why aren't you wearing a shirt? Long story, it got ripped up and it was my last shirt, Naruto replied sheepishly. All eyes went to him. The kunoichi present took the time to giggle and blush, but quickly looked back to the cage. Unoki was taken aback by his granddaughter's actions and hoped that she wasn't tempted by the Namikaze's appearance. He knew she was a lady and all, but he thought he taught her better to keep her emotions in check and save them for later. Oh okay, do you need a shirt? The proctor asked. Naruto quickly replied with a shake of his head. Why? Just like his father. The third Raikage mentally grumbled. I'm starting to regret this entire endeavor. I don't trust the Otokage, he seems sinister. Okay. I am Gecko Hayate and I will be the proctor for the preliminaries and Finn, he had a heavy cough. Finals, look up there and the screen will pit each genin against another in a spar. Jutsu and others are allowed but killing isn't. Understand? Hayate coughed some more but then pressed a button on his remote. The screen started flittering through names. Akamichi Choji vs. Akatsuchi. The rest of the teams left the arena floor and made way for the 2 burly shinobi to have their spar. They walked 10 paces from each other and kept steady faces on, but even before the fight could begin, Akatsuchi raised his hand and quit right before the fight could even start. Everyone face faulted, especially Choji since he made it to the finals without even having to do anything. Hayate pressed the button on his remote again and the names started crunching again. Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto vs. Rock Lee. The two jumped over the railings and landed adjacent to each other. They stared each other down for a few moments before the match started. "I'm sorry, Lee, but I want to end this as quickly as possible," Naruto said, catching Lee off guard. "Hajime." Just as soon as Hayate swung his arms down, Naruto's Tsutomu shot to life and blasted Lee through the wall and out into the forest, completely unconscious. Silence. The Hokage choked on his pipe. Zabuza dropped his sword and the other Kage were just in slack-jawed awe. Naruto beat another shinobi in less than a second. Hayate was so surprised that it scared away his coughs. The other genin were surprised as well. Maybe everyone but Team 7. Kurotsuchi, Haku and Ino felt blushes brighten up their faces. This show of power only served to impress them even more. Winner Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto. Naruto nodded his head and headed up the steps to the platforms. Once up there, Sasuke grumbled about show-offs with Dujutsu and Sakura was saying something about hurt taijutsu specialists. Naruto smiled to himself, but was quickly led off by Kakashi. Naruto protested at first, but was told that it was about the cursed seal. Immediately, the two went off to find that Jiraiya had just entered the tower and was looking for them. "Naruto, come here." Jiraiya looked for an empty room and led the two into it. Already there were two other Junin there drawing seals onto the floor and the pillars. Jiraiya led Naruto to the center and had him kneel in the circle of seals. Kakashi sped through hand seals and slammed his hands on the floor, activating the seals drawn. Seals from the circle shot up and wrapped around Naruto's body and raced up to the cursed seal on his shoulder. Jiraiya and the other sealers were seated with their legs crisscrossed. The sealer on the right of Jiraiya had the snake hand seal, Jiraiya had the dragon seal, and the sealer on his left had the tiger hand seal. They were there to make sure that the sealing stayed constant. They were planning to remove the seal if possible. But if what Naruto told Jiraiya about the other seal holding back the Kyuubi, then there might not be a reason to do such a thing. Back in the arena, Temari had just defeated Tenten and was on the list of previous winners. Choji was the first, then Naruto, Shino, Shikamaru and now Temari's name joined them on the winners list. Up next was Sasuke and Haku. The black-haired boy was sure to beat her and get her back for nearly killing him. He didn't hate her, it was just an Uchiha thing. The two stared each other down with calm expressions. Sasuke's Sharingan wasn't even activated yet. Haku looked with a smile. Yoko was up in the platform looking at Haku with a big smile. But then again, she knew that Haku was going to lose. Naruto told her that she would. Anyway, with the fight beginning, Haku started off with an appetizer of Senbon showers. Sasuke jumped back and blocked the needles with a kunai and threw the knife at her in retaliation. Hyouten. Haryu Muko no Jutsu. Sasuke's eyes widened when he didn't recognize this jutsu. He backflipped and sped through hand seals. Suddenly from out of nowhere, a large tiger made from pure ice shot for the Uchiha. Sasuke finished his seal pattern. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. Sasuke sent a blast of fire at the girl, but she finished another set of hand seals. Hyouten. Isudomu no Jutsu. Ice formed up around the girl and protected her from the fireball. She dashed from the other end with a blade of ice formed. She smirked to herself and went off at speeds unknown and charged for Sasuke. Control of ice without water nearby, she must have a Kekkei Genkai. Doesn't she? Mizukage Dono. Hiruzen asked. She has two actually. Ice release of the Yuki clan and swift release. Zabuza replied. That is how she moves so quickly. Interesting. The Kage piped. Back with the fight, Sasuke bent back to dodge a chest swipe from the ice sword. But just as he dodged, two ice crystal mirrors formed and almost immediately, he was pelted with Senbon. He looked back to Haku with a smirk and jumped back into the air. It seems that I won't be playing around anymore. Sasuke's Sharingan glared to life. He sped through hand seals and finished the pattern almost as quickly as he started. Kaden. Hausenka no Jutsu. Haku's eyes widened and she jumped back and weaved her way in between each ball of fire. Sasuke took this as the time to close the distance and take Haku down. The girl was confused by the heat, and had little time to react to Sasuke's barrages of kicks and punches. Haku was hit in the cheek by Sasuke's foot and sent hurtling for the wall, unconscious. Winner. Uchiha Sasuke. Medics came rushing in and left with Haku on a stretcher. Sasuke sighed and walked back to the stands with Sakura. The names started rushing through and stopped quickly. Haruno Sakura vs. Yamanaka Ino. Immediately everyone got silent. The two most powerful genin kunoichi of Konoha were about to go at it. Sakura and Ino hopped over the railings much to Hayate's annoyance. I mean, can't they just take the stairs like normal people? He waited for the girls to get situated and ready. He raised his hands and gave each girl a look. Hajime. Rantan. Reiza Sakasu. Sakura was amazed at Ino's speed with the jutsu. Rantan. The third Raikage was stupefied. But, wait, she is of the Yamanaka clan, I am really starting to regret this invasion. Rantan huh? Unoki observed the fight. A large explosion went off and Sakura quickly sent off a large earth wave at Ino. Seems that Konoha is full of surprises. I'm not one to regret decisions, but I don't want to kill off shinobi and kunoichi with this much potential. First the Namikaze, and now the Yamanaka, this is too much to think about. Doden. Doryuden no Jutsu. Sakura front flipped and a large dragon made from earth shot up and started shooting off blasts of energy at Ino. The girl sped through hand signs and started replicating the melting ice to form more water from her chakra. Sweden. Suire Kage no Jutsu. The water shot up and formed a thick wall. The blasts hit but were doused immediately. Sakura's eyes widened when she saw Ino's hand seals. She could vividly remember the last time the girl did that jutsu. Sweden. Nami no Suiraku no Jutsu. The water wall started changing its shape and sped towards Sakura. The attack connected and obliterated her earth dragon and sent the pink-haired girl into the wall behind. Ino sped through another set of hand seals and mouthed, "I'm sorry," to her best friend. Raiden. Ekatai Shindo. The spark shot from Ino's fingertips and combined with the large amount of water that surrounded Sakura and electrocuted the poor pink head into unconsciousness. Ino went ahead to collapse too but forced herself to stand back up. She was low on chakra again and was struggling to stay standing. Hayate came down and checked Sakura and nodded his head to the Kage and other proctors that Sakura was indeed still alive. Ino smiled and fell back down to her knees when she was named the winner. Up in the stands, Rushi was observing the fights, but he found himself thinking about the entire invasion. He looked up and found that Kurotsuchi was fighting some no-name Kiri shinobi. He shook his head knowing the outcome immediately. He was brought back to his thinking and looked over his shoulder at his fellow Jinchuriki, the Nibi girl. He didn't want her or any of his Jinchuriki brethren get hurt, nor did he want to kill innocent civilians to get to the last, at least last fertile, Namikaze. It didn't help that the boy was such a kind person. Before Rushi could continue his thoughts, Kitsuchi pulled him away and gave him a look. It was an unreadable look, but Rushi didn't question his teacher and looked back to the arena. The blonde-haired Nibi girl was standing in the center going up against the dog boy from Konoha. The two jumped up and screamed out, "Gatsuga!" and spun like little tornadoes and crashed and smashed wildly while still trying to take the blonde girl down. It looked like they won, but when the smoke cover dropped it came to reveal Yugito holding Kiba and Akamaru by their heads. She dropped them with little care and headed back up to the stands. Rushi shrugged and let his mind wander while the other rounds went by. Yugura annihilated Karui, the redhead from Kumo. Omoi defeated Kankuro by pure unaltered luck. Gaara went up against one of the Hyuga present and wrapped him in his sand and forced the white-eyed boy to surrender. Once Gaara won, Rushi did a quick look at all the winners. Akamichi Choji, Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto, Aburame Shino, Nara Shikamaru, Sabaku no Tamari, Uchiha Sasuke, Yamanaka Ino, Kurotsuchi, Niyugito, Yagura, Omoi and now Gaara. Rushi jumped over the side knowing full well that he'd have to fight now, seeing as how he was the last one. Hinata calmly walked down the steps of the stands and faced Rushi. She shivered slightly, but activated her Byakugan. Her eyes widened when she saw the great power of the Yonbi festering within him. Rushi sighed and waited for Hayate to signal the start of the match. Hajime. Rushi charged forward with a fist covered in lava. Hinata gasped but got her footing fixed. Rushi punched, but was blocked by Hinata's wrist. She sent an open palm strike and bashed the boy on his chest, sending him back a few feet. Rushi jumped up and sent an axe kick down onto her, but she sent an air palm at the boy, keeping him at a distance. The redhead sighed but charged forward anyway. He sent a right hook, but Hinata ducked and bashed his chin. She spun on the heel of her right foot and sent another palm strike to his gut. Rushi hunched over but recuperated quickly. Hinata palmed his chin again and punched his chest, sending chakra into his system, shutting off his chakra points. To a surprise, Kitsuchi was under a genjutsu placed on him by Orochimaru. The poor Junin had no idea what he was doing at the time, but he placed a seal on Rushi's Jinchuriki seal that allowed him to lose control of his sanity and in the process lose control of his Biju. Kitsuchi threw up the ram hand seal and activated the seal. Almost immediately Hinata noticed the change and was about to call an end to the fight, but she was punched in the chest by Rushi. What is he doing? Kurotsuchi gasped with wide eyes. This wasn't part of the plan. Rushi picked her up and threw her against the ground. No one noticed this, but Rushi's eyes were dilated and devoid of pupils. He had no control of his body and it seemed that he was nothing but a puppet. Kitsuchi was still under the genjutsu and smiled like the Otokage did beneath his mask. Rushi raised his fist and rammed it into Hinata's gut. She spit forth a large amount of blood, terrifying everyone present. Rushi had a blank expression on his face as he continued to wail on the poor girl. But then a sandy tail shot out and Kurotsuchi jumped down. Hayate and the other Junin stepped in to stop the raging genin. What's wrong with you? The black-haired girl pushed her teammate, but she was quickly backhanded by Rushi. Immediately afterwards, Haku and Ino got ready to defend Kuro. The Aiwa girl sped through hand seals that Zabuza knew quite well and quickly stepped in. Unoki was deeply pissed that his granddaughter was slapped like that. Something was definitely wrong with the plan now. How dare you hit me like that? Kurotsuchi growled. All men except for Kitsuchi, Rushi and Unoki backed away from the Aiwa kunoichi. Who the do you think you are, Rushi? Calm down, Kuro. Unoki said, trying to calm the situation down. We will sort this out later. Rushi, I am disappointed in you. The redhead looked away but didn't say a thing. Soon enough Naruto showed up, completely unaware of what happened. His tail suddenly tensed and he looked at the bloody form of Hinata lying on the floor. He looked to see everyone ready to attack Rushi. He was slowly piecing everything together, but when he saw the red mark on Kurotsuchi's cheek his anger spiked. Naruto knew that they were supposed to be enemies, but why did Rushi hit Kurotsuchi like that? Hey! Naruto shouted as he walked up to the large group of genin. I swear. Naruto. Hiruzen said sternly. Calm down. Reserve your emotions for later. I have no choice but to name Rushi as the winner of the match. Hayate sighed. Now that the preliminaries are over with 12 winners, you will all have to choose a number from the hat and say the numbers out loud, starting with whomever gets number 1. After everyone reached into the hat, they started the countdown. Akamichi Choji, 1. Yagura, 2. Yamanaka Ino, 3. Kurotsuchi, 4. The girl looked over at Ino and gave a small nod. Omoi, 5. Sabaku no Gaara, 6. Uchiha Sasuke, 7. Aburame Shino, 8. Nara Shikamaru, 9. Sabaku no Tamari, 10. Niyugito, 11. Rushi, 12. Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto, 13. So, the first 5 matches will be normal one-on-one matches. The final will be a free-for-all match between Niyugido, Rushi, and Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto. Hayate nodded his head to Hiruzen, still trying to get used to having no coughing fits. Now then, the finals will take place in 1 month. Hiruzen said, I advise that you take this time to train rather than sit around and do nothing. Good luck all of you. See you at the finals. The month passed quickly. During such time, everyone crunched in as much training as possible. Naruto also happened to have disappeared for the month time with Jiraiya. They went to the land of the foxes and Naruto trained his sage mode there and at Mount Myoboku. The kid was a sage of 2 different summoning clans. He had 3 types of summons under his control. Foxes, toads and eagles, thanks to his mother. Naruto was also in search of the ultimate summoning, the dragon. The boy during his free time from senjutsu training, he trained his Tsutomu to the point that Jiraiya worried about the kid's eyesight. Naruto had also mastered the Rasengan, but for other variants that the kid wished to make, required both senjutsu chakra, which Naruto constantly called upon, and the Tsutomu to form. Naruto in this time created 3 new variants of the Rasengan, the official Udama Rasengan, the incomplete Fuden, Rasenshuriken and the kid's growing favorite, the incomplete Fuden, Rasenbakuden or in other words, the spiraling bomb. He had to settle for wind release since he didn't have storm release like he planned to use it for. Naruto also grew taller by an inch or 2 and changed his outfit completely. He now had on a short-sleeved, maroon and collar-less haori with red triangles at the bottom of the cloak. Naruto wore a black and dark orange jacket underneath. The right half of the jacket was black and the left half was orange. His pants were black baggy shinobi pants and he wore black shinobi sandals. His hitai was also changed and had the same plate that Jiraiya had. The strap, of course, was orange. On his back were 3 scrolls. 2 were small while the central scroll was huge. The scroll on top read Washi. The central read Gamma, and the bottom read Kitsune. Naruto's hair grew out and he had a small Jiraiya ponytail growing. His bangs were definitely longer much like his father's, and his face was leaner like how his father's was when he was Naruto's age. Naruto also added specialized kunai holsters for his 3-prong kunai since they were too big for the standard issue kunai holsters. Naruto's physical strength also increased exponentially. His muscles were bigger and more defined than before. He looked to his side to see Yoko, Seiko and Fujika playing with each other. Naruto and the 3 Kitsune also worked together much like how Kiba and Akamaru do, minus their clan-specific jutsu. Naruto instead does a lot of kanbaijutsu with them. With his companions with him, they were like a full team fighting together. Another amazing thing was that the foxes could freely change from their human form and into their fox form. When they entered their human form, they were dressed in samurai armor and had katanas strapped to their sides. Yoko could do earth and water jutsu without hand seals and was quick to draw her sword for a quick parry or defense if need be. Seiko was a stamina freak and chakra maniac and was able to keep fighting for quite some time with wind, lightning and fire jutsu. Seiko wasn't called the soldier for nothing. She not only had 2 swords but she had 5 more for each tail. Because she has 5, each tail can weave each element to her advantage. And finally Fujika. She could not only use lightning techniques for quick takedowns and backstabs, but she could make herself turn invisible to the eye. Perfect assassin. The only problem though, was that Naruto couldn't use them for the finals, so they were going to have to sit back and watch the match with their chosen protectorates, at least until they have to go and fight in the arena. The 3 kits yipped and jumped around trying to wrestle while in their fox forms and enjoyed the fun until Naruto checked his watch. Oh, I'm gonna be late. Naruto grabbed all 3 foxes and disappeared in a puff of smoke. In the arena, if Uzumaki Nami, Genma was interrupted by a massive blast of smoke and wind. The other 12 genin looked to see Naruto on top of an eagle with 3 foxes surrounding him. The Haori-clad boy immediately shook himself from the heroic scene and slipped off the eagle and face planted with the ground. Haku, Ino and Kurotsuchi face-palmed and shook their heads, while everyone else laughed at the redhead. He stood back up and patted himself down. Am I late? Naruto asked, breathing hard. No. Genma simply replied. Now then. May everyone but Akamichi Choji and Yagura leave to the competitor's box. Now then. Killing is allowed, but it would be in your best interest to not kill each other, K. Genma added with a little laugh at the end. He took out his senbon and held it in his hand. He looked at the two and smirked. Hajime. Immediately, Yagura reached behind and grabbed his hooked pole arm and swung around. Choji evaded the attack, as the pole smashed into the ground, kicking up dirt and rocks. Choji sent a flurry of shuriken and kunai, but Yagura blocked all of them. The silver-haired genin jumped up and spun before slamming the pole arm down on top of Choji. Choji didn't realize it, but the pole had water building up at the tip. Baika no jutsu. But Choji was instantly deflated, when the pole arm bonked his head. With Choji out of it, Yagura relented his assault and looked up to the cage box. Damn. Winner. Yagura. Genma shouted out. Cheers were heard and people were clapping loudly for the Kiri boy. Next round, Yamanaka Ino and Kurotsuchi. Come down. Let's go then. Ino smiled. Just so you know, I learned a lot in my clan's techniques. I learned even more for lava release. Kurotsuchi replied as she got onto the railings with Ino. The two girls hopped off with their hair and clothing flying about. They landed softly and smirked idly at each other as they stood 10 paces from each other. Genma raised an eyebrow but shrugged it off. He put his senbon back in his mouth and raised his hand. Without another word, he shot his hand down and the two girls charged forth. They started off with an order of taijutsu. Kuro sent a punch for Ino, but the blonde ducked and sent a punch for Kuro's gut. Kurotsuchi evaded and sent an elbow to the back of Ino's head. The attack connected and the blonde girl fell forward, but she burst into smoke. Kurotsuchi turned around and saw Ino speeding through hand seals. Rantan. Reiza Sakasu. A blast of heat and light kept Kurotsuchi on her toes. Lasers shot at her, tearing through the ground and whatever else happened to be up at the moment. Kurotsuchi sped through hand seals and started throwing up lava. Yugen Cabe no Jutsu. The lava built up and formed a large wall. The lasers broke through, that much was expected, but Ino was too busy trying to tear through the solidified lava that she didn't realize what Kurotsuchi was doing. Suddenly, Ino started sinking into the ground. She felt heat below her feet and broke her concentration with the jutsu. Yugen Numa no Jutsu. The ground started turning into lava beneath Ino. Her eyes widened, but she quickly calmed herself down and went through another set of hand seals. Ninpu Kanten no Jutsu. Kurotsuchi was about to jump down with a kunai, but the jutsu met its mark and Kurotsuchi went limp, breaking her control over the jutsu. The rising lava stopped and solidified. Ino pulled herself out of the dried and solid swamp. She walked up to Kurotsuchi and held a kunai at her throat. It's over, Kuro-chan. Ino inwardly knew that the fight was too straightforward. The Kurotsuchi below her started turning into stone. Immediately, the blonde took evasive action and barrel rolled forward to dodge a barrage of solidifying lava balls. Kurotsuchi was spitting them out like nothing. Yugen no Jutsu. Kurotsuchi sat on a boulder protruding from the ground and shot out massive amounts of bullets made from lava. Ino jumped and weaved in between each attack. The terrifying thing about the attack was that when the bullets hit the ground while still in liquid form, they exploded outwards and sent smaller lava balls flying. I need to loosen her up. Ino backflipped and dodged a large lava ball and stood atop the built-up dry lava. She sped through had seals faster than Kurotsuchi did. Ino smiled and zeroed in on the Iwa genin. Rantan. Shushu go. Immediately the sky darkened above the arena. The feudal lords in the stands were amazed at the power of such beautiful kunoichi. Once the sky reached a peak, lightning boomed above them. Kurotsuchi expected rain, but nothing came for a short while. She looked at Ino with a weird face when the blonde didn't move for some time. Suddenly a small glowing trail of light shot down from the sky. Kurotsuchi shot her eyes up and quickly erected an earth wall. She heard burning and sizzling. The blue light suddenly plowed through her wall and burned into the ground. Kurotsuchi looked back at Ino with wide eyes. The sky boomed again, but this time, the lasers started falling. Each laser seemed to have locked onto her. The black-haired girl threw up whatever defense she could think of, but it was all futile. Not only were her defenses failing, but she was also wasting her chakra on such constructs. Kurotsuchi front flipped and landed on a large boulder and started shooting out blasts of fire and water to fight back the lasers. Ino smiled and relented the jutsu. With her sensory abilities, she was able to surmise that Kurotsuchi was at the same level of chakra as she was. Only enough for one last jutsu. The sky lightened up and the lasers stopped coming. Kurotsuchi was gasping and panting. She was low on chakra, but she didn't want to fail her father or grandfather. Nor did she want to fail in front of Naruto. She eyed the arena looking for Ino and hopped off the rock and channeled her lava chakra and formed a lava fist. Ino stood in front of her with a fist covered in Rantan chakra. Ino narrowed her eyes and glared at Kurotsuchi, and the Iowa girl did the exact same thing to the blonde. There were a few moments of silence, raising the tension to heights unknown. Ino charged forward with her Rantan-imbued fist as Kurotsuchi dashed ahead with lava shooting off of her fist. Boom! The ground shook with a rising intensity. Shockwaves were sent vibrating throughout the arena, shaking a few people from their seats and causing a few daimyo to burst out in excited laughter. Down in the arena, the two fists collided, with the special elemental jutsu trying to outdo each other. Rantan chakra spread and spiraled into the lava arm and started electrocuting Kurotsuchi, while her lava fist started burning Ino's knuckles quite badly, but neither dared to relent. In a last-ditch effort, Kurotsuchi sent a kick to Ino. The blonde was knocked back, but as Ino flew back, she kicked Kurotsuchi's temple, effectively knocking her out. Ino collapsed on the ground, out of chakra and energy. Genma jumped over to check the two girls' vitals and released a sigh of relief. He looked up to the cage box and the people present and flashed two thumbs up. Everyone gasped in relief and started cheering for the two girls. Naruto was smiling like an idiot by the end of the match. The entire time they were giving their all, and now, he knew how to counter the Shushu Go. Naruto smiled to himself since Ino couldn't use that jutsu on him anymore. He didn't worry about them since he knew they wouldn't die so soon. Alright, next match. Omoi. Gaara. Come down. Genma called out, deigning from using flashy entrances since he feared of wasting too much chakra on flashy entrances could cause him to lose, but somehow he was able to connect that to an invasion of aliens. Gaara, on the other hand, chose to shunshin using his sand, and quickly got to the arena floor below. The Ikibi Jinchuriki waited patiently, seeing as how he has all the time in the world. After nearly 3 minutes, Omoi made it to the arena and sighed in defeat. Ready? Genma asked. Ready. After receiving 2 nods, he threw his hands down and jumped back. Hajime. Gaara wasted no time and shot his sand tendrils out to grab Omoi, but the Kumo shinobi dodged the attacks easily. Gaara then did something he has never done before, it even surprised his father. The Jinchuriki removed his gourd and let his sand tail flow with no problem. He calmly walked toward Omoi with the ultimate defense following him wherever he walked. Omoi saw this and calculated his chances of success carefully. After a few moments of thought, he was going to go with the 3% success. He charged forward with his hand on the handle of his katana. Gaara sighed and let the attack hit its mark, but the sand of the ultimate defense shot up and took the hit instead of Gaara himself. Omoi's eyes went wide, and he quickly retracted his blade and back flipped away, making sure that he didn't land in sand or around it. He looked back up and found that Gaara was nowhere to be found. He started panicking, but then a punch smashed into his cheek. Omoi flew back a few feet, but repositioned himself. Gaara had a different look on his face. He held out his hands and formed a naginata from pure sand. I asked my father for some of his gold dust, Gaara started. I mixed it into the sand and now, my spear is perfect. Gaara charged forward with waves of sand helping him close the distance. The redhead lunged forward with the spear, not expecting it to hit its mark, and was blocked by Omoi's katana. The strange thing about the katana was that it was glowing with lightning chakra. Gaara spun his spear around again and brought it down on the Kumo shinobi. Omoi clashed his sword with the blade of the spear, but instead of the desired effect, the blade was split in half. Gaara started lunging and slashing for Omoi, but the kid dodged, weaved, bent and evaded every attempt Gaara made to get him. Omoi wasn't paying attention to what was happening. Gaara got close and bashed him in his chest with the butt of the spear and sent Omoi flying into a large dune of sand. His eyes widened. He looked down to Gaara, whom of which, dropped his spear and held his hands up at the dune of sand. Narration. Suddenly little spike of sand shot down from the sky and embedded into the sand dune around Omoi. Omoi's eyes went wide when he realized what was going on. Lightning shot down and started jumping from lightning spike to lightning spike, and ultimately, Omoi himself. When the electricity hit the boy, he screamed out in pain, but he tried to stay conscious. The strange thing about this lightning was that he wasn't immune to it. As a lightning user, he was supposed to be immune from all forms of lightning and electricity. Once the electricity finished pulsating through his body, he tried to stand up, but collapsed and rolled off the sand dune. His breath was slow and heavy, but before he could collide with the ground, Gaara formed up a sand platform and caught the unconscious Omoi and carried him towards the infirmary. There was a long moment of silence and Genma named Gaara the winner. Alright, Uchiha Sasuke vs. Abura. Proctor. I yield. Shino quickly said, clearly not wanting to fight Sasuke. Everyone gasped in surprise and all eyes went to Shino. He merely stated the fact that it would be highly illogical to fight against Sasuke, especially since he was a close-quarters powerhouse that would beat him with little to no problem. Shino sighed and looked away. Might as well. Shikamaru gave Sasuke a look that slightly pissed him off. I yield to Proctor. I'll die if I have to fight the Uchiha. What the dude? Sasuke asked with slight anger in his voice. Come on. Don't quite, dude. It's already done. Shikamaru sighed. I don't feel like dying so soon, Sasuke. Lazy prick. Sasuke growled. Naruto sighed and stood from his seat. Temari opened her fan and used it to surf down to the arena. Sasuke had a blank look on his face. He looked over to Shikamaru to see that he wasn't impressed with that, but then again, Shikamaru says being impressed with something means that you have to examine it and critique it, and to do those things you have to work. Which is in a simple word, troublesome. Sasuke jumped over the railing and landed silently in front of Temari. From what the Uchiha was able to discern from her fight in the preliminaries, she was highly proficient in wind jutsu. He could only assume that she got better. He took a deep breath and nodded his head. Nothing but fire jutsu. He learned that when Naruto got in a pattern with his Kazemi, the redhead would just send wave after wave after wave of wind at the Uchiha. Sasuke at the time was confident with his lightning release and would send out lightning strikes, but the wind would beat it back, leaving Sasuke to use his fire techniques. Let's just say, it was majestic. Hajime. Temari swung her fan open and sent a large blast of wind at Sasuke. The Uchiha shut his eyes and activated the Sharingan. Much to everyone's surprise, he had 3 tomo in each eye instead of just 2. Naruto's face brightened and he turned to Kakashi. The silver-haired Junin nodded his head slightly at Naruto and smiled back. Down in the arena, Sasuke sped forward with speed close to Haku's when she'd use swift release. Sasuke evaded the wave of wind with no problem and sent a few shuriken as a distraction. She sent a blast of wind to blow the projectiles off course, and succeeded. She realized something though. Sasuke was nowhere to be found. The Uchiha was hiding behind one of the many dried lava constructs still standing from the previous fights. Sasuke threw up the familiar cross-hand seal and 10 clones formed. They knew the plan and they scattered to different boulders. One of the Sasuke clones was filled with more chakra than the others and charged out with a big smile on his face. The clone looked at Temari and taunted her, causing her to chase after him with her fan. The Uchiha clone led her in between the rocks and boulders and dried lava. Immediately everyone knew how this was going to end. People's hearts were beating. They were excited. Temari coughed up with the Uchiha and swung her fan down onto his head. But when she realized where she was, the remaining Sasukes came out and sped through hand seals. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. The 10 Sasukes, including the original, shouted at the same time. Temari's face was stretched in fear. She couldn't use wind jutsu in a situation like this. The real Sasuke acted quickly and vanished underground before the fireballs were shot. No one watching the fight noticed Sasuke disappearing. Boom. The Sasukes shot out long trails of flames at Temari in the center of the circle. The flames collided with the ground and the entire central clearing in between the rocks, basically turned into a kiln of sorts. Fire shot out from the creases and shot up when the pressure became too much. When the flames cleared, the clones popped out of existence. But instead of crying pain, or ing, the sound of chirping birds was heard. Temari's face was wrought with fear when she felt the electrical charges stick to her arms and neck. She shivered and took a deep breath. Surrender, Temari. I don't want to kill you. Sasuke whispered. That, and I don't think Shikamaru would like me kill you. Temari blushed brightly and looked up to see Shikamaru with a worried expression spread across his face. She gave a small smile and looked down to the ground. She raised her hand and Genma immediately shot down to her. She took another deep breath before saying the words. Proctor. I surrender. Temari dropped her fan at her side and Sasuke released his Chidori. Everyone exploded in cheers and clapped for the end of the match. The Kazekage sighed in relief and wiped the beads of sweat that formed on his forehead. The other cages repositioned themselves for the final fight. The fight that everyone was excited for. The three-way between Yugito, Rushi and Naruto. The three Jinchuriki wasted no time. Yugito lightning sunshined and Rushi lava sunshined down to the arena while Naruto simple jumped over the side like so many others did before him. His haori flapped wildly and his tails were enjoying the wind felt when he descended like that. Girls giggled and whispered about Naruto with big smiles and blushed faces. Haku, Ino and Kurotsuchi were immediately annoyed by the comments. The three of them watched silently with their kitsune. Kurotsuchi would have rooted for Rushi, but since he disrespected her in front of her new friends like that, she lost all respect for him, even though she knew something was wrong with him. Kurotsuchi was worried for Naruto since Rushi had an almost impenetrable lava armor. She knew all about his weaknesses, even though he didn't have many, but she didn't have enough time to give it to him. The three Jinchuriki were going to fight each other blind. Out of the three in the arena, Yugito was the weakest. Naruto made it his plan to defeat Yugito first and take on Rushi by himself. He didn't want to look forward to the two Jinchuriki ganging up on him. While he walked up to the two Jinchuriki, he channeled as much nature chakra he could. He even had two clones calling on nature chakra that the toads use, and he had two cones calling on the eagle nature chakra. As a sage of the three summons he is signed to, as a fox, he is already in fox sage mode, and he will never get out of it. With toad sage mode, he gains the eye shadow of a normal sage mode eye. He also learned the frog katas from Lord Fukasaku and Lady Shima. During his month-long training with his different summons, he mastered the eagle sage mode. When he first entered the eagle sage mode, great brown, feathered wings sprang from his back. He basically looked like a crazy monster from myth. The great thing about him was that he was able to stack each sage mode upon each other, and allow the use of 4 sage modes at once. With all three combined together, Naruto can't be hit, surprised, or caught. That was why he was in search for the dragon summoning contract. He wanted his last Sage Mode master to be the Dragon Sage Mode. A problem with Eagle Sage Mode was that one had to use a constant and concentrated flow of wind chakra to keep the user floating. As they stay levitated, they are able to get the type of nature chakra found only in the sky. The Sage Mode of the Toads required Naruto to sit and meditate for any given amount of time to build up nature chakra, while in Fox Sage Mode, he was able to continuously in nature chakra even while he was doing everything he normally would. Ready? Genma asked. All three genin nodded their heads. Hajime, Yugito and Rushi shot back. Rushi sat down behind a dried lava column hidden from sight, but not from Hinata's. She kept watch on his chakra flow. Suddenly, the flow was greatly disturbed, and the dark power within him started washing out his normal chakra. Hinata looked surprised and looked up at the cage box after following the chakra trail. She narrowed her eyes at the Otokage whom had a hidden ram seal beneath his cloak. She looked back to see Rushi's facial expression changed. Hey, guys, Hinata whispered to her friends. Everyone looked at her. Come on. We should go to the competitor's box, it's really important. She was followed by a large group of genin, as they ran up to the competitor's box. She knocked on the door and it opened to reveal Kurotsuchi. Hinata walked in with the rest of the genin that participated in the preliminaries. They had looks of confusion but walked in anyway. Hinata took a deep breath and went on to explain her hunch. Down in the arena, Fuden. Hiryu no Jutsu. A large invisible dragon shot towards Yugito, whom of which had a hard time dodging the constant blasts of wind and high-leveled jutsu being hurled at her. Naruto wasn't even concentrating on Rushi. Every attack sent at the Kyuubi container, Naruto dodged it and slapped it back at Rushi with one of his tails. Yugito was sweating bullets when Naruto channeled a large wave of red chakra. He sped forward and rammed his fist into the girl's gut. He pulled his arm back and sent a roundhouse kick into her chest, knocking her down into the ground. People gasped and groaned in pain from seeing the drop kick connect. Yugito was a coughing mess for a bit, but Naruto used his tails and wrapped them around her and threw her into a wall, knocking her out for the rest of the fight. Naruto turned his attention at Rushi, whom of which had a maniacal smirk spread wide across his face. Rushi sped through hand seals. Yuden. Shikugaryugen no Jutsu. Rushi took a deep breath and shot out large lava bullets, but the bullets cooled slightly and formed large rocks covered in bright red and yellow flames. Naruto sped past each one, evading and weaving in between each rock as it passed by him. Naruto shunshined behind him and had a glowing ball of spiraling goodness. Rasengan. Naruto rammed the ball into Rushi's back, sending him flying off into a dried lava structure. He jumped forward and started speeding through hand seals. Up in the competitor's box, Hinata had just finished explaining what she was able to piece together by looking at Rushi's chakra signature. It was as if he were on a genjutsu, and there was a time limit before whatever was inside of him exploded outwards. She explained that it was like how Naruto had something inside of him and that there were three others that were like Naruto and Rushi. The difference was that three of the Jinchuriki were at peace with their Biju, while the other two seemed to be struggling for power, especially since the blonde girl got knocked out, her inner power was spiraling out of control. So you think the Otokage is using the manipulating the Tsuchikage and Reikage? Kakashi asked. That has to be the only reason. I saw the looks on their faces and the changes in emotions on their faces. Hinata said. I also followed a trail of chakra leading from Rushi, when the changes took place, back to the Otokage. This is bad, Kakashi said. In the arena, Fuden. Rasenbakuden. Naruto hurled through little Rasengan into the air. After a few moments of spinning and cutting through the wind, they landed around Rushi and exploded violently and sent him flying into a dried lava column. He sat back up and was blasted with a heavy wave of wind. The Jinchuriki struggled to stay upright. Naruto formed another Rasengan, but before he could charge forward, he was grabbed by a blue tail of chakra fire and thrown into the walls of the arena. Everyone gasped. Yugito ran up to Rushi and lifted him up to his feet. It was never against the rules to team up on one of the contestants. People were cheering for the plot twist, while being completely oblivious to the coming storm just outside the walls of the village. All around the village there was a massive army of Kumo, Iwa and Odo shinobi all amassed together as one. Amongst the ranks of the army, there were Kumo shinobi signed with the wolf summoning contract and there were Odo shinobi signed with the snake summoning contract. It was invasion and no one knew. Except for the fact that Konoha did know. As of now, the village had successfully hidden thousands of Kiri, Suna and many Konoha shinobi. Many were hanged as civilians and merchants, while others were hanged as simple objects that would normally be found in a bustling village like Konoha. They were hanged as trash cans, birds, wires, doors, and whatever they could possibly find. Kumo, Iwa and Odo had no idea what was coming. Naruto recuperated from the attack and looked to see Rushi looking like a monkey and Yugito with claws made from the Nibi's chakra. The two of them had shown their true colors and had chosen to team up on Naruto. The redhead of Konoha dispelled one of his clones gathering Gamma Senjutsu chakra and dispelled one clone that was gathering Washi Senjutsu chakra. The changes were immediate. Two wings sprouted from his back and made him look like an angel. His tails enlarged and he gained an orange eye shadow as a result of mastering Gamma Senjutsu. Yugito and Rushi backed away in fear of what Naruto had become. Jiraiya in the stands beamed at his grandson knowing full well that the kid had far surpassed his father, and know he was stacking senjutsu upon another senjutsu. Jiraiya was amazed at this, and couldn't help but to smile. It wasn't his fault. The amount of nature chakra calmed everyone's nerves and made them happy. Naruto opened his eyes to reveal the Tsutomu. The two Jinchuriki charged forward which close-range attacks, but Naruto was able to dodge each one. Not even a singed or shocked part of his clothing or skin. He landed on his feet and flapped his wings, sending Tsutomu leveled winds at the two. Naruto shot his tails out smashing them against the two Jinchuriki, sending them careening into the walls of the arena. Just as Naruto was about to deliver the finishing blow to the two of them, a series of explosions rocked the village. In the distance smoke began to rise and the sounds of combat started echoing into the village ambiance. Feathers began to fall. Naruto started to feel drowsy, but his mother and Kura bonked him awake. Naruto woke up from his drowsy state and glared at Rushi and Yugito. Another explosion sounded. He turned his attention to the cage box. Immediately, the cages were battling it out. In the cage box. It ends here. The Namikaze name will be no more. Both the third Raikage and Tsuchikage shouted. The Otokage removed his robes to reveal Orochimaru in his combat armor. As well as Konoha. Back away Hiruzen. Zabuza and the Cage grabbed the Sandaime Hokage and hopped away with him in their arms. In the competitor's box. Dad. No. Kurotsuchi screamed to her father. Akatsuchi didn't even fight. Kitsuchi barged into the room with a group of Iwa and Kumo shinobi. Omoi and Karui defended the Konoha teams. Kurotsuchi and Akatsuchi took up defense against her father. Kuro turned to Haku and the others. Go. Defend the village. I'll handle my father. Ino and Haku charged from the room with their teams right behind them. Gaara and Yagura jumped over the railing to join the Jinchurikis fighting in the arena below. Sasuke and Sakura left with Kakashi to aid in repelling enemy shinobi coming in from the west gate. It was utter confusion in the air. Smoke filled everyone's lungs. Explosions filled their ears. They were at war. With Ino. Ninpu. Genmatsu. Ino's jutsu spread in a wide arc and connected with many Chunin-leveled Iwa and Kumo shinobi. They turned on their comrades and started killing each other, making it easy for them to pass through to the south gate. She ran past a group of Kiri shinobi fighting Iwa shinobi and sent a few blasts of lightning at the rock ninja. To her right Haku was speeding through hand seals. Futen. Daitapa. Walls of Iwa shinobi were blasted back by the combined jutsu effect of Temari and Haku. The two lovers of Naruto were about to be overtaken from the flanks, but there was a sudden change in chakra output in the battlefield and a purple and black fox dropped down in front of the two girls with. She stood on her hind legs and started transforming into a human with curly hair. Haku smiled brightly at Yoko.